Good evening, everyone. You're just going to have to give me one moment to set back up here, and we'll be ready to go in a second. First question, Emil, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. A couple months ago, Nellie asked me if I would come in and do this program and she was instrumental. I'll talk more about that in helping me put it together. She did advise me when we were working on this that I had to keep it to at least an hour and 45 minutes. So if I go any longer than that, it's all her fault. Okay? Soldier right down the river, Nellie. So I'm going to be talking to you about the life of an Italian in Seneca Falls. Great when things work. Okay, so to start off a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about get you warmed up. So we're going to talk about some Italian phrases. Can you hear me with the microphone down here?
Yes.
Wave at me if you can't, because I'm Italian. I talk with my hands, so I'll be moving it around. Okay, we're going to first look at the Italian flag. The Italian flag has three colors in it: green, white, and red. Okay, the green represents hope and joy. Okay, white represents peace and honesty. And red represents strength and value. Now, I know for a fact there's somebody out there that was thinking that the green stood for basil, the white stood for mozzarella, and the red stood for sauce or gravy, right? Yeah. There's some terms up here that are pretty common to even the second and third generation Italians that live not only here but all over the country. And the first one is stunad, which means idiot. The second one is mensa morta, somebody's lacking energy. The third one is mapin. The red mapin. The Italian mapin. The next one is agita, which means acid indigestion. Now, I've known a few people in my lifetime that have given me agita. And in fact, my mom, God rest her soul, she was 93 when she passed away. Her first name was Marguerite. And when we used to have like some spirited conversation, I used to tell her, Ma, you're giving Margita to me. And she understood what we were talking about. Briagon means drunk person. Okay, face brut means ugly. Stata zit means shut up. I heard that a lot. Don't anybody yell it out while I'm doing this, okay? And cabados means stubborn or hard-headed. So now everybody is kind of like quasi-Italian in the room. You've heard it. Over here on the wall, right here, there's more expressions if you want to see them later on. Okay, so the history of the migration to Seneca Falls and why it happened. From 1870 to 1890, the economy in Italy just totally flattened out. There was a lot of reasons for it. It was faltering because of political unrest, also because of earthquakes that had shook Italy and ruined a lot of its major cities. And the whole economy was faltering. Okay, wages for people, when people went out and looked for jobs, they would find them, but they were very low paid, and very highly taxed. So young men in their beginning of their work life decided that they had to go to another country, someplace else, to be able to make a standard of living for themselves and their family. So they started to move. Some of them went to Russia. Others went to North Africa to work on the railroad system. Am I going too far? Okay. To work on the railroad system that was being built. Okay, then others decided that they were going to go work on the Suez Canal, and also the South America, and specifically Argentina. Argentina has a very large immigration of Italians back in the 1800s. This is my cousin, Rosalie Ferrara, Leone, and her grandmother, and I'm going to talk about our family a little bit, but our second grandmother, Sabina, her two brothers left Italy and went to Argentina, and unfortunately our grandmother never saw her two brothers again, but they corresponded with each other quite often. So what brought the Italian immigration to Seneca Falls, or actually to America? Well, one was that it began to shift to the United States because America had a busting industrial revolution going on. There were more jobs than there were people to be able to work, that needed people to work. So many of them immigrants came to the United States to set up enough time to gradually get enough money to go back to Italy. They had no real inner thinking of staying here in the United States forever. The first wave didn't, and it became known as a passage of the birds of passage. They would come here, make money, save up, and with the economy being so good here, they could make enough money to go back to Italy and live a tremendous life. 60% of all the immigrants from Italy that came to the United States went back to Italy at least once during their time that they were here. Okay, so Seneca Falls at the turn of the century was a busting, very busy industrial community. And the reason for it is because it was centered around the canal, or actually the Seneca River, which was the canal now. We had 9 major factories that were there that went all the way down into the flats. Now I think just about everybody realizes that the flats no longer exist. All those industries and homes were moved out when they built Van Cleef Lake, because they needed that for the canal system when it came through. So the new immigrants that came from Italy knew that there were a multitude of jobs for them within the community where they could make a substantial amount of money. Okay, when they came to Seneca Falls, they would arrive by usually railroad. New York Central Railroad went all the way from New York City straight through up the Hudson River, through Albany, all the way to Buffalo, and then west. So that was their passage here. That's going to be very important a little bit later when I talk about a few of the people that came here, some of the forerunners of the Italian immigration. Okay, when they would arrive here, they had a very difficult time. See, because the Italians were different than any other group to immigrate to the United States at that time frame. And the reason for it is because they did not speak English. They didn't speak English, hardly any English at all, if they could speak any. Where the first immigrations of Irish came over in the early 1800s because of the potato blight, they spoke a light language. They knew the customs of the country because they were close to what they were in Ireland. But the Italians were different, and I'll get into more of that when we get farther into this presentation. So they would come to Seneca Falls and they would try to show somebody with a wagon or some type of transportation at 60 State Street, which was the old police department. It's going to be the new restaurant up the street here. They would show that to a taxi driver or wagon driver of a name or an address of somebody that they knew here, who they were going to their home to try to possibly stay with them and help them find work. Okay, they came by train, as I said earlier, and when they arrived, they had to find housing. Okay, left a couple of them. Bless you. Okay, so the first settler, permanent Italian settler in Seneca Falls was Charles Farnese. Charles Farnese was born in 1863 in Italy, and he came to Seneca Falls in 1884. Bless you. Okay, in 1884. Okay, he was, as I said earlier, he was the first permanent Italian settler here. He was an amazing man because not only he could speak English, but he spoke fluent Italian. So he was a real resource not only to the Italian immigrants, but also the community. I consider him to be the first Italian entrepreneur in this area, because his first job was selling peanuts and cold drinks or drinks from a cart down at the corner of Fall Street and State Street. Later on, he ended up developing a store downtown, and he had the store, and then in the fire of 1890, when it wiped out all of Fall Street, part of State Street, damaged the hotel that we're in right now. There was either the Hogue House or the Carr House at the time, I don't remember which one. He and his wife decided, and this is a picture of the Fenicis right here, decided there was money to make. So he got his push cart back out, and his wife and him made sandwiches and had fruit and had drinks and sold it to all the construction workers that were working on rebuilding downtown Seneca Falls. Because of his ability to speak English, he also became an agent for a steamboat company. Now the steamboats used to run on Cuca Lake, so he would actually find employees for them, Italian immigrants, to come in and work for the steamboat companies. I think he was a tremendous individual, not only in starting up businesses, but he was a property owner, which was very difficult at that time. He ended up owning the Wonderful Life Museum building that's down here on Lower Fall Street. That was the first theater in the village of Seneca Falls. The village, and now it's the town of Seneca Falls. So that's why I call him the first Italian entrepreneur. The next individual I want to talk about is Benito Colella. Now, how many of you here remember or knew Jimmy Colella? Okay. An awful lot of us. You know, the joke was always that he was the godfather of Seneca Falls. You know, but Jimmy Colella's father was born in 1873. He came to Seneca Falls by a connection with Charles Bernisi. The story goes is that Benito came here, and didn't come here. He came to Ellis Island. He bought a ticket at the train station to come to Pittsburgh. Nowhere close to Seneca Falls. Nowhere close. You know, because he didn't speak English, he had a very tough time trying to buy the ticket. He got the ticket. So then he went to go get on the train. He asked railroad officials which train he was supposed to get on. There was a misunderstanding. He got on the train heading to Albany. He got on the train heading to Albany. He got to just about Albany when the conductor would come around and check your tickets, you know, and punch them. Well, when they were checking his ticket, the conductor said to him, "You have the wrong ticket. You're on the wrong train. You're supposed to be going to Pittsburgh. When you get to Albany, you're going to have to get off. You're going to have to purchase a ticket to go to Pittsburgh." And he kept saying, "No capisce. You know, I don't understand. I have no idea." Charles Bernisi was on that train. Charles Bernisi had gone to New York City to pick up supplies to bring for his store here in Seneca Falls. So he intervened, and he started explaining to the conductor that I will work this out. So he convinced Benny Colella, and we used to call him Uncle Benny, to come to Seneca Falls. Stay at my house, and I promise you that I will find work for you. Well, Charles Bernisi did help him. He went to work at Gould's Pumps. He worked there for 57 years. Now, Uncle Benny, and you can see his picture here, he had a bicycle there. Uncle Benny rode a bicycle until about his 80-something birthday. But prior to that, he rode a horse every place around the community. And then when Jimmy and Paul decided that it was no longer safe for him to have a horse with the traffic and the amount of cars that were on Fall Street, he went to a bike. And I can remember when I was a young kid seeing Uncle Benny drive, around the community on the bike, but also he would be in every damn parade. He'd get in his bike and he'd drive around. So this is my grandfather. Now this is Rosalie's and my grandfather, okay? Ralph Leone. Okay, my grandfather came here in 1917. Right? He and his first wife Mary Josephine, they came. Their first stop was not here in Seneca Falls. It was to Rochester, and my grandfather's first job was moving bodies around at the morgue in Monroe County. It was a dead-end job. He hated it, Okay, cut on pain, It was a dead-end job, He didn't like it, But our grandmother, Josephine, Marie Josephine, was related to Uncle Benny Collella's wife. And they persuaded them to come to Seneca Falls. And then with Uncle Benny's help, and others, he was able to get a job at the Geneva Foundry. And he worked there for well over 40, I think it was like 48 years in the foundry. That was when, it's always been a dirty job, but it was super dirty. Pounding sand, making cores, it was terrible. I can remember one time my grandfather, when I was younger, and Rosie might remember this, a casting broke and burned his foot, and he had to have it bandaged. He never missed a day of work, That's just the work ethic that the man had. So they had five children, 2 that died shortly after birth, and then my Uncle Benny, who was Rosalie's dad, my Aunt Vancy, who was the middle sister, and then my mother, Marguerite. When my grandmother went into the hospital for gallbladder surgery, when my mother was only 18 months old, she died from complications from gallbladder surgery. So my grandfather said, I can't raise these children by myself. So he farmed his children out to other Italian families in the community, and he went back to Italy. So the passage to Italy was a boat ride across, taking a ship. There were no planes to jump on. So my grandfather did not shave on the way over there. He was well kept, but he didn't shave. Very handsome man, got off the boat, went to meet this family and a lady by the name of Elizabeth. And when he went and met her, Elizabeth wasn't really into my grandfather, So her sister Sabina said, and she was going to the convent, she said, if you don't want him, I want him. So she married my grandfather, and that's the grandma that Rosalie and I always knew, And my grandfather was just a little bit over 6 foot, and grandma was 5'10". So they're 4'10". I'm sorry, 4'10". So it's always good to have family in the crowd. Yeah.
Would you go back to the slide for Benny Colella, and they were all of his children, because a lot of us know those people. It's in the 3rd paragraph, right?
Okay, yeah, thanks. So he had 4 sons and 3 daughters. Vincent, or Jimmy Colella, Paul Colella, Gabriel, and Joe, and 3 daughters, Rosaline, Rose, and Anne. They were the children. Did you have a question about them? Or?
And then Anne married Doc Romeo.
Yes, Anne was Doc Romeo's wife. I knew Paul and Jimmy because they owned, of course, my father was a bowler, we were related to them. They owned Finger Lakes Bowl. Gabriel, I didn't know, and neither I didn't know Joe. The story about Joe is that he died very young. The Colellas had a farm at the corner of Blackfoot Road and Ridge Street, and it was an actual working farm. And they would have to take the wagon out to tend the animals and take care of the animals and also the crops that were out there. And they always kept a shotgun that was in the carriage or the wagon they were in. And unfortunately, a mishap happened. The shotgun went off and killed Joe. And he was very young, and I looked it up, and I forgot how young he was. And when I was very, very young, Jimmy Colella was a member of every club in Seneca Falls and some other ones. So I was in Kiwanis at the time, and we were going to an interclub meeting, and he was telling me the story about that.
Thank you.
All set, Emil?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so most of the immigrants coming to Seneca Falls moved in with friends and relatives. But then again, a lot of the people that were established here in Seneca Falls rented rooms to the Italians, so they can afford to buy their own home. And it helped with the economy of some of these people who had large homes. One of the ideas of the Italians, and I'm sure of other cultures too, was that saved money every week because the American dream was to own your own home. So they saved money, and then when the Italians tried to go out to buy property, homes in certain parts of this community, they weren't well accepted. They really weren't, and neighborhoods quickly, band together, and would not sell homes to Italians, and take purchase offers from people who were non-Italians instead of having an Italian living on their street. So finally, two sections of Seneca Falls actually became known as predominantly Italian sections. And they were the Center Street 3rd Ward, okay, and then the Rumsey Street 2nd Ward, and they became predominantly Italian communities. That is, the Center Street section is over in here, and the Rumseyville is over here. Now, my beautiful cousin Rosalie and I lived in the Rumseyville or Rumsey Street area, you don't mind me telling where you live. Ridge Street, we lived on Pleasant Street, and my grandparents lived on the corner of Ridge Street and Rumsey Street, So it was a predominantly Italian area, and so was the 3rd Ward. Now, it makes sense, because a lot of the Italians that came here and got jobs, where they lived where they worked. And in the 3rd Ward, they were very close to the industries that were along the canal. And then also the Rumseyville area, the pump company was there. So they were able to work at Gould's Pumps, and the prior pump company that was there. So it made sense for them to buy properties in that area. Okay, so then they decided they needed social clubs. And now the social clubs weren't just to get together to have a good time. They were mutual benefit associations, some place where you could go with other people, where you could discuss in your language, the problems or the concerns that you had. And the first one was the SMS, and I would try to pronounce it in Italian, but I would only butcher it. So it's just up there. And the SMS was established in 1904. Okay, the very first SMS meeting was held at 32 Center Street at John Salati's house. And then in 1920 something they bought, and then they moved downtown to the feed store and the 2nd floor, and they held their meetings there. Then in about 1920 something, they ended up buying the property at 95 Ovid Street. When they bought that property, this is the first SMS building that was ever there. And the way that they built that was a lot of the labor of their countrymen, but also they sold stock options or options into the building to people who wanted to be club members. And it was built in like 18 months, and within 3 years, everybody had been paid off completely. The next club was the Sons of Italy, and that went from 1926 to 1933. They met at the Old Town Clock building down at the corner of Fall Street and Cayuga Street. And they ran into financial difficulties because a lot of the people that belonged to the SMS also belonged to the Sons of Italy. There was just so much money going around, so they lost their chapter. Then the next one was the Rumseyville Sportsman's Club, which was started in 1950. Now, that's where I grew up, in the Rumseyville area. That's where Rosalie grew up. Rosalie's father was one of the original people who started the Rumseyville, and guess where they met? Anybody got an idea? Pardon me? Okay. Romeo's Bar and Grill. At the corner of Oak Street and Rumsey Street. And then in 1950, they bought a lot a house was torn down, and they bought a lot at 32 Ridge Street. Now, The significance to us that is that my grandfather lived right next door to it, right on the corner, you know, thing. And they had the same type of mutual society ideas that the SMS, and usually they were members of both. Okay, so growing up in an Italian family, from my perspective, this is a tremendous picture of the Bovi family, you know, and that's Dr. Bovi, you know, and Amo, I'm sorry, I should have told you I was going to say this, but Dr. Bovi was one of the godsends to this community. He really was, you know, he could speak Italian, some Italian, definitely English, and he helped a lot of our families, you know, when my brother and I were born, I'm an identical twin, so they played that joke on my mother twice, you know, then when I was born, Dr. Bovi only charged my parents one delivery. And I think they paid for me. The English language, you know, was a barrier. So the Italian language was only spoken in the house. You know, the language barrier was very tough for all the family members, especially the women of the house. You know, our grandmothers. You know, because the husbands would actually go out to work. They would be around other people. They learned from the people that they worked with. Our grandmothers stayed home and took care of the kids, and usually only socialized with other friends of theirs, kumads and kubads that they had, you know, and so they weren't able to grasp upon the American language as quick as their husbands did. I know in our family, you know, Italian was spoken at my grandmother and grandfather's house, but they wanted everybody to speak English, you know, because they wanted us to become Americanized. You know, they wanted the best for all of us. They wanted us all to have educations. Am I right? You know, So, you know, so that was one of the things that the language barrier thing. I cannot speak Italian. I understood more Italian when I was growing up than I can actually speak. I can swear you up a storm in an Italian, but to be able to speak it, I do understand some of it. I'll tell you a quick story. We have two sons, Adam and Aaron. Our oldest son, who's 42, you know, when he was very little, we used to send him to a babysitter that Arlene Herring, and Arlene grew up in an Italian family, and Capello's, I think her last name was. So our son used to go there. I know Amo's kids used to go there from time to time too. You know, so my son was playing with building blocks, and he was piling them up, and the building blocks fell over. You know, so my son said, and I'm sorry, I'm going to swear in Italian. My son said, "Ah, fate Gould," like that. You know, Arlene went ballistic. She grabbed him, she put him in the corner, and she said, "I can't believe you said that. Do you know what you're saying?" And he said, "I'm sorry, Arlene, but those are football words. That's what my father says when he watches the Giants." So, you know, so the language barrier was there. Okay. With Italian families, everybody is considered to be family, no matter if they are or they aren't really blood relatives. Most homes had a revolving door where you didn't even knock. You just came to visit. You know, that extended families usually sometimes lived with each other. Grandmothers and grandfathers would have children or live with their children who had their own children. Okay, we had uncles and aunts and cousins that weren't even uncles and aunts and cousins. They weren't, but we called them that. We had kumads and kumbats, you know, that were like blood relatives to us. But that's the way that the culture was. Okay, the kitchen was the main room of the house. Okay, many of us had a second kitchen in our house where all the real heavy work was done. You know, the upstairs kitchen, I used to kid my mother, was for show. You know, the downstairs kitchen is where all the big cooking would happen. Our mothers, our sisters, our grandmothers used to do all the preparation. Now, I will explain to you that there was a uniform of the day for all of our grandmothers and mothers. And I have one here with me tonight. This is the uniform of the day. Okay, thank you. My mother, my grandmother, used to wear one when they got up in the morning. And let me come over here. When they got up in the morning and wear it until they went to bed at night. They usually took it off when they came to the table to eat. Okay? There were two different types of these. The ones that were nice, that you wore like when company came, and then the ones that were a little shabby that you wore when you cleaned and you cooked. I used to kid my mother. I think she would get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and put one of these over her house coat. But she always wore one. Because of the language barrier, we would have to I'll go to mom and pop grocery stores, what I'm talking about in a second. But we had a gentleman by the name of George. And George, and I don't know George's last name, and I've tried numerous times to find out. He had a green panel truck, and he used to come from Rochester, and he brought bread, gem oil, all the different cold meats, and he would deliver them right to your house. He would bring things like gabagool, mozzarella, mortadella, all these things that he would bring. But he had a very, very interesting system of keeping records of what you bought. Because you would go out and you would make your purchase, and he'd say, "Get you next week." And he'd write it in the book. And then the week would go by, and he'd show up again, and you'd order, and he says, "Okay, it's time to pay." Usually what you bought may not exactly match what George sold you, So there was some pretty colorful conversations that would go back and forth. Okay. We also had a guy that had fizzy pop, and he used to deliver it, in the back of a truck, and he always came back to pick up the bottles. Okay. Like I said, a lot of our relatives did not drive. They didn't have driver's license, so they needed to go to a grocery store. What they would do is have to rely on another family member or neighbor that had a license, or walk to one of the mom and pop grocery stores. And we had like Agnello's grocery store, Giglio's, Caruso's, we had Caparelli's, And this is a picture of Agnello's grocery store, downtown Seneca Falls, and that's Patty's grandfather here in the picture. One more quick story. So we had the New York State blue laws back in the 60s where businesses could not be open. They could not sell anything. But Mr. Agnello used to open up on Sundays for a few hours. So one Sunday, my mother said to my dad, she said, "Frank," she said, "we don't have enough cheese, grated cheese for lunch today or for dinner today." She said, "Would you go down to Agnello's and get some?" So my father said, "Sure." So I said, "Dad, can I go with you?" And he said, "Sure." So my mom kiddingly, said, "Make sure you tell Mr. Agnello to keep his thumb off the scale." So Fred gets in the car. Fred goes down with Dad. We walked in the store, and my father said, we want a pound of fromage, the great fromage. And he said, "Okay." So he takes it, he started putting it on the scale. And Fred stood there and said, "And my mother said, make sure you keep your thumb off the scale." Mr. Agnello laughed like hell. He really did. My father didn't laugh at all. Fred didn't like it at all either. But that is a true story. So much of our food that we consume were all homemade. We would make our own tomato sauce or gravy, whichever one you want to call it, wine. We'd make all of our own wine. We had very large gardens. All the vegetables that came to the table, we got out of our own gardens. And we always put them up. We would can them. There was no freezing things back then. We would can them. Tedious jobs, even fruit. The plums. We used to do peaches. All of that. My family, the Capozzis, used to slaughter a pig every year. And make our own sausage. Horrible job. Terrible job. I think the last one we did was the first year that you and I were there, and my wife wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing.
Good first impression.
Yeah, it was a good first impression. So we would always have, and then we would even can that to preserve it. Okay, so the most important day of the week was Sunday. Sunday was the most important day of the week because there was two things: going to Mass and then the family dinner. And you know what was really unusual about the family dinners? We used to talk to each other. It's amazing. You know, thank God there were no telephones or cell phones. You know, we used to talk. If you didn't go to Mass and you didn't go to dinner, you had to call in dead. So it was very, very important. There were three main words about our families, and they were faith, family, and food. Very, very important. We celebrated every holiday just like everybody else did, but our holidays were a little bit different. Like Thanksgiving, we had turkey and we had stuffing and we had yams and we had all this stuff. But we usually had like Italian wedding soup and lasagna and raviolis, and that was part of the meal. So it was just totally different. The Feast of the Seven Fish, when my grandparents were alive and my mom and dad were alive, we went by the letter of the law. That's all we had was fish. Because you couldn't eat meat on Christmas Eve. I got to back up a little bit. This picture here, is the last year that my wife and I hosted the Feast of the Seven Fish at our home, for our family. This was the last year my mom was alive, And there's food like smelt, calamad, bacalao, which is codfish, done multiple different ways into sauce and in a salad. When my grandfather was alive, we used to do eel. There was all. Did I make you squirm? It was pretty good. No problem. That was the the Feast of Seven Fish. But going back to here, because of the society the way it is today, the closeness that families have, because of the fact that everybody has their own family, everybody starts their own traditions, a lot of that is filtered away, And I don't know if it's good, but it is, The way society looks at the old ways of doing things, it's probably good that it changed, but I do miss some of them. I'll give you an example of one of the things that happens today, that I find it hard to believe, but then my wife tells me I'm tremendously old-fashioned, How many of you ever seen the show Bachelorette? Okay, Anyone see it? Okay. So anybody hasn't seen it, here's the scenario, okay? That you have 25 guys, single guys, who show up at this big mansion, and then there's one woman, right? And she is going to date every single one of these guys. She's going to go on group dates and private dates and then getaway dates and all these things. And unfortunately, I watched part of this with my wife. Now, today, we call that Bachelorette. When I was growing up, it would be named Bhutan. That's the difference in the culture today. So, I have to tell you that there's a few other things that I have here that one of them, which is not near and dear to my heart, but this was my mother's. I was 16 before I found I could cook with this mother. I had no idea. And she always preferred the one with the slots in it, because you could feel the wind coming through. Two things that were always in every Italian's house is one is that there was always a crucifix that hung in the house, but the other was, something I said? Okay. A picture of the Pope. And later on in life, there was a picture of JFK there because he was the first Catholic, president. If we happen to say to our mothers that we didn't feel good, then immediately, they'd start making chicken soup. We consider it an Italian antibiotic. And it did work, you know, it really did. But if that didn't work, Mom would go out and get a bottle of Vicks Vapor Rub and put a coat about 3 inches thick on your chest, and then put a mop bean on it so it didn't stain your pajamas, and tell you to go lay down so you suck up all the fumes. And at the end of the meal, if you told them that, oh geez, I got a stomach ache, I can't eat anymore, they went out and got the broski. They went out and got that for you. Now, it's called broski, we called it cheddar. But it was, that's what was used. So before I end and ask any questions, this is my family. And this was the last year, my mom is right here. This is the last year my mom was with us. As I said, she was 93 when she passed away. And that's all of our family members, and that was at our house. So before I end, there's a couple of people I got to thank, tonight. One of them is Nellie. Where are you, Nellie? Just wave her hand.
Oh, she's over there.
Okay, Nellie, because without her, this wouldn't look that good. She did an excellent job. I really appreciate it. Daisy, who did a lot of work with me trying to go through the archives and trying to find some of the stuff that I needed. Patty, who put this whole thing together. I really appreciate her doing all that. My wife, who's heard this 22 times before I came here tonight. I will in a second. My wife wants me to tell the one story about my grandfather, and I'll tell that real quick. So the language barrier. My grandfather, there used to be a store downtown here called Ben Franklin's Five and Dime, years ago. And my grandfather walked every place. So he walked down to the Five and Dime here, and what he wanted to buy is a pan with a colander in it for macaroni. So he went in and he was looking and he couldn't find it. So he said to the lady at the desk, that front desk that was there, she said, I want a scala macaron. And she's going, I don't understand. He said, a scala macaron, he said, the thing that the macaron stop and the water goes. And she goes, oh, you want a colander. My grandfather says, I got a colander on the wall at home. Come on. But they were able to do it, I'll tell you one more quick one and then I'll wrap up. So, a good friend of ours, they lived on that street, they were going to Syracuse and they were driving through Elbridge and they had that big flower and fruit market that was there. So they got out of the car and he wanted to buy cantaloupes, or cantaloupes and honeydew, So he went over and he found the cantaloupes. But he said to the proprietor there, he goes, I'd like to buy some mushamalones. And he's going, I don't understand. And he said, mushamalones. He went over and he pointed to him, to the cantaloupes. And he goes, oh, that's a cantaloupe and that's a honeydew. And he said, how do you do? That's a true story. I never got permission to tell. Did you hear me, Amo? Okay, that's a true story, I think. And well, I'll tell you, it was Bobby Parato's grandfather. The Paratos that lived on Pleasant Street. Okay, so I thanked a bunch of people, but there's two people that I really have to thank, and that's these two people right here and up here. That's my mom and dad. And because of all their guidance and making me the man that I am, they make me a great father and also a husband. But the most important thing is because the two of them fell in love, all this happened. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Okay. Any donations? Nothing? Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, for the best part of the night, we're gonna let
Okay.
everybody know